Really delighted that so many of you are joining us today. And in particular, a shout out to, I think we've got colleagues from Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales as well, which is lovely to see. We often get a majority from England, so I don't know whether I don't know how the balance will break out there. Nothing wrong with a majority from England either, let me be clear, but nice to see people from around the whole of the United Kingdom here. So Education Support is a charity, you probably know that, and I'll just, for anyone who wonders why they've ended up in this webinar, it'll be because we're all about well-being and mental health and improving the well-being and mental health of everyone working across all education settings in the UK. So that's why you came here, and jolly good choice you made too. And what sits behind this webinar is really, I think, our awareness of the importance of the parent-teacher relationship. And without wishing to embarrass Michele Reilly at all, I had the pleasure of listening to her speaking at an event at the Royal College of Medicine. And she talked so eloquently about the experience of being a parent and a parent or a parent advocate and being on the wrong side of a bad conversation and some of the simple things that would have made those better experiences. And it struck us that there's an awful lot to learn there. And actually, if we have the opportunity to just sit and reflect a little bit about what makes for good conversations, we have a hunch that that might be valuable to professionals in schools and colleges who are in that situation of having conversations. Some of which go well and others don't. So that's what brought us to this conversation. And we did a little bit of research last month just around the topic of teachers and teaching assistants and how they felt their relationships with parents were. And we're quite surprised to find that a high proportion of people felt that their relationships had improved actually during COVID. Now, when you drill into that, that's heavily in the primary school sector. Where relationships have improved and people have had the opportunity to connect with families. Families have appreciated what teachers have done during that time. I don't think it's the same in the secondary sector, and I think there's maybe been a bit more distance because we've also at the same time had correspondence from teachers saying that they have had to deal with extremely aggressive parent situations and they found that very difficult. So this is kind of us putting a toe in the water in this conversation, and we hope that we'll do more in the space, but let's see where we get to. I'm delighted to have, three brilliant people to join us and to talk some sense on the subject. So I'll stop so they can say something, and then we'll kind of integrate your questions as and when they come. But let me start by asking colleagues to introduce themselves and to say a little bit about why this subject matters to them. So Kully, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please, sir, and tell us why this matters to you?
Thank you, Sinéad, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all well. A few comments there talking about the rain, and I can say that rain has now made it to the West Midlands too. It's just started, so thank you for wishing that upon us. Yeah, absolutely. It's been certainly an eventful few months, as we say, since the onset of lockdown approximately just over a year ago, and we've seen this issue between parents and teachers in particular. It's a topic evolve very quickly. I think there have been learning moments or opportunities to learn and reflect throughout the year. But as principal here of a secondary academy, Sinéad, I can certainly say that I'd second that, certainly in the sense where you were talking about, I wouldn't say aggressive parents, because sometimes it's parents who look to us for advice and guidance because they see a vault, really. There's nothing there that they can really grasp hold of in the news or in the media. And the questions, therefore, are left for us to answer. And we there on the front line, as all of us here in this forum will appreciate. And it's up to us then to make sure we come up with the answers. I'll come up with more tips later on, but very much the first thing I found is that in this position, working in a secondary school of 1,000 students here in the West Midlands, is don't try and be the first person with all the answers. Don't suddenly try and rush to make sure that you've got everything right. There's a moment there to reflect and make sure that you heed the advice of all of the institutes and organisations out there if you're part of a multi-academy trust or your local authority, and also give that opportunity to parents to voice their opinions too. So hopefully the conversation will evolve around that, but I'm certainly looking forward to discussing it further.
Brilliant, Kully, thank you. And I'm going to come to Michele on the nice segue there about giving parents voice, because I know, Michele, this is something that's very dear to you. But can I ask you to introduce yourself and also just a little bit about why this topic matters to you?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me today, because like many parents, we've been on the other side of the conversations, but also as parents who've had great experiences as well with teachers. For about 10 years, I've been doing the support group in Lambeth. So at the really sort of sharp end, I've been at reintegration and exclusion meetings. And it's quite what parents often do say is that, although you may not agree with them, that they like to feel listened to. And that's just so valuable. And when things not rarely get aggressive, but if they can get very heated and very emotional, it's the ways of de-escalating that. And I just hope to be part of that conversation today. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then Shira, delighted to welcome you here. Can I ask you to introduce yourself and just say what it is that draws you to this topic?
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be part of this webinar, and welcome to everybody who's attending. So I've spent just over 7 years working in education setting. I am a qualified secondary school teacher, so I have experience of working in the education setting, but I left teaching to retrain as a psychotherapist, and I work as a psychotherapist, but predominantly work with children and young people, but also adults. And a number of those adults do work in schools that just by chance they work in schools. So I have obviously, I have experience from a teacher perspective, the challenges that teachers face. Obviously, this was many years ago. As I said, I've been out of teaching for a couple of years now. But obviously, the challenges when it came to talking with parents about things that with respect to children and young people was something that I don't think has ever gone away. Obviously, COVID has brought its own challenges, and we all recognise that. But I think it's really important that I now see it from both angles of how we can best support people to be able to have positive relationships and positive conversations together, so we can work to help each other. But most importantly, for me as a psychotherapist, I think it's about people's health and well-being. Because if you have a very negative experience, or you feel that you're not listened to, or you'll feel like your voice is not being heard, or you'll feel that actually you are backed into a corner, that does impact on people's health and well-being. It impacts on their confidence. It can impact parents on their belief of themselves as parents, but it can also impact on teachers' ability to actually believe that they are delivering really wonderful, and in some cases very important, but in some areas challenging work, because every school is very different, and every school is in a different educational setting, and some of those schools will have challenges that are not school-based, but actually based because of where they are, so and because of the individuals that they are teaching. And I think it's really important to recognise that as well.
That's great, Shira. Thanks a million. Michele, can I come to you just to kick off the conversation from a parent perspective? And I know you're not here on behalf of every parent in the country, so I take that burden off your shoulders, and I can step into the out parent shoes too. But from a parent perspective, what is it that makes communication between teachers and parents sometimes difficult?
Well, I think that you have to look at the parent who's coming to you, because especially in the school where I'm a governor and where my children go to school, it's a very cosmopolitan place. And so some parents are coming in from a very different school setting that they went to themselves. So one thing in Europe is that children often kept down a year if they fail to meet certain targets. So many parents are very shocked that their children has progressed to the next year, and then they're finding out that they're not meeting certain standards. So I know that for Portuguese, Spanish parents, that's just totally, why didn't you tell me earlier? And then in other ways, parents may have had a poor educational experience themselves. So when they enter that classroom, they can feel very much blamed. They may made to feel inadequate. And then, of course, there's what I call the sort of WhatsApp monster, when maybe one parent puts something in a chat that this is happening or isn't happening, and things can just get out of proportion really quickly. So I feel that's easy for that to happen, but I think just setting the tone of the meeting and showing that you're wanting to work together with the parent is so key to it. And it could even be, if it's face-to-face, offering a tea or a glass of water. Well, I'm not sure about COVID restrictions, but that type of thing, just to show this isn't a confrontation. This is about, we're working something out. You don't have a problem child, you have a child with a problem. So it's just really setting that tone in the beginning.
That's really helpful to draw our attention to the different personal experiences that adults who interact with schools have, and also just the understanding, and I relate to this very much. You know, I grew up very close to the United Kingdom, and yet the school system has only just stopped being a mystery to me. So of course that's something that's going to be difficult for all sorts of people up and down the country. Kully, from a school perspective, what do you think it is that makes these conversations between teachers or teaching assistants or school leaders and parents and carers sometimes difficult?
I think it's important to remember that a parent, and I'm a parent myself of 2 secondary school children and one daughter who's in primary education, that you could be bombarded potentially with numerous points of contact from school. So there could be your English teacher, your maths teacher, it could be a year lead, it may then be the attendance team to make sure that a child is online, or if we're talking remote education wise. But that parent then will have to deal with that if they've got 2 or 3 children in education still, with multiple calls, while still also dealing with everything else that they must do, such as working from home, the pressures of running their home, and all the bills and everything else. These are everyday issues that our parents and carers face. So what we found in secondary education, certainly very early on, was we made a single point of contact. So our year leaders were the ones who would make contact home, and that teachers, if they had to, would refer things into those year leaders to make an overall point of contact, as opposed to numerous calls bombarding parents. But of course, I alluded to it really early on when I first spoke, is parents have questions and they need to feel that they're able to access us at school here. At the Academy at Bristnall Hall here, we set up things such as email contact. It may not be appropriate for them to be answering the phone call if they've got, if they're on live Zoom meetings as we are here now due to work. They should feel that they're able to send something and that it will be followed up within a certain amount of time. And that doesn't necessarily always mean that in a few minutes. It may be, for example, with our parents, we agreed that we'll respond within 24 hours, certainly in the first lockdown. Of course, if it was a safeguarding concern, there was a separate point of contact, a separate email alert system, which would then be flagged. But parents needed access to us because ultimately they lost all of that form of access that their normal day-to-day working life. And because the schools remained open, we saw it very much as our part to remain transparent, to provide as much information as possible. And if unfortunately we didn't have the answers due to the guidance or whatever it was that was evolving quickly, a promise that we'll get back to them. I think that's really important from a parent-teacher point of view.
That little moment of just acknowledging a communication can be very important, can't it? That this hasn't gone into some kind of black hole and you never know whether you're going to get a response or not. It's those little things sometimes that can make a big difference, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm just going to say that if it's okay to acknowledge something by saying, I haven't got the answer to that yet, but I will call you back. And that's crucial. Sometimes we procrastinate because we feel as teachers and leaders in education, we must have the answer there and then. But it's okay to go and check the guidance, 151 DFE updates from March, I think, until July there were overall that principals had to look at. It's okay to take time and decipher that, not to put it off, but to say that I'll be back to you as soon as possible and then follow that up.
I only laugh at this as an adult because I, know it's taken me a long time and I'm still not there. I've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, but I seem to spend a lot of time saying, guys, did you hear what I said? With that sort of child's silence, selective hearing moment. They're like, yeah, no, I did hear you. I just don't know how I'm going to respond. Like, oh yes, as an adult, I still need to remember to do that. Shira, I know from your perspective as a psychotherapist and also understanding schools, you'll have some thoughts on what are good models for how we have conversations. From the teacher side, if we're thinking and preparing for a conversation with a parent that we think we need to put some preparation into it, we need to make sure that we've been thoughtful about it in advance. How could we be thinking about shaping that conversation?
Yeah, so there's quite a few things that as teachers you can actually do that are very, very positive, but also very empowering for yourselves as teachers. I think first thing is obviously each school has a different system. So it's great to hear what Kully's saying about what his school does. It's just like, wow, that's fantastic. But every school is different, and we know that. So be fully aware of what your school policies are and what your school does. And maybe if you've got a proactive school and you've got, a senior leadership, or you are in senior leadership and you are attending, maybe think about how we could make things better, how we could improve the communication ways. But what I would say is the first and foremost is look on the school system. So when I was a teacher, it was called SIMS. I don't know if it's still there. It might be called something different. And see how many times a parent's been contacted, or see if there's any patterns on the system about that child's behaviour, or if there's anything that actually says to you, there might be something going on here. Take a moment to reflect, as in really sort of see, is this how I feel? Is this fact? Is this belief? Is there something about this? Do I have that information? Before I even contact parents. Sometimes give yourself a bit of time. So if you are going to say to a child, I'm going to call home, don't specify a date, because you might need to have some time to go away, find some information. But also, as Kully said, and as many of you know, your parents and parents are juggling so many things in their lives at this moment in time. So it might be that you can't call them straight away that day, or it might not be appropriate for you to call straight away. You might need to speak to somebody first within the school. You might need to speak to the point of contact within the school to decide how best to approach something. So give yourself some space, take some time to reflect, but also see if there's any patterns. Is there something about that might be going on at home? So one of the things you can do is also focus on the language that you use when you do call home and speak to the parent. It's not, it's not about saying your child is a problem child. Focus on positives that their child does. It's really important for them to know, because if they have been having 101 phone calls about their child, they'll pick up the phone and go, oh, what have they done now? And you don't really want that. But also check it's a good time to speak to them. It's really good practice. Give them your name, tell them where you're calling from, and ask them, is this a good time to speak? Or would it be better if I called you another day or another time? Give that parent that control. And then if they say, actually, could you call me later, or could you call me after 4 o'clock, or could you, then do that. We now know that we have this ability with digital technology that actually, in some parents, it might be helpful, rather than just doing a phone call, to maybe do a face-to-face virtual conversation. They might appreciate that better. They might find it. Again, each school has a different policy. So check with your school if that's possible. And then think about the language, but also think about where the child, think about the socioeconomic background of the young person that you're dealing with. As Michele said, and as Kully was saying, some people might have had a very bad experience of education. They may be that they've got an experience of education from a different country. Their ethnic background, again, might impact on how, when they get that phone call, they might be absolutely mortified that their child has done something which to them is just not acceptable. So also think about that. But also check with that young person, is the relationship with their parent, if you were to call home, not going to be jeopardized? Because again, that could create something far worse than what you're trying to achieve. And what I would also say is, think about the language that you're using. Use positive language. Check in with them. Ask them if, has anything changed at home? Have they noticed anything different about their child, or the young person, or the teenager? It might be that they are also struggling with the teenager. They might be, you pick up the phone, they're like, I don't know what to do. And as Kully said, yes, if they give you some information, if they tell you that they're struggling, tell them what you're going to do. Do that, then let them know you've done it. That shows them that you have listened to them. But most importantly, if you do speak to that parent, however way that might be, it could be face-to-face, it could be virtually, it could be on the telephone, give them space to talk. And I know sometimes time is at a premium for us, all of us, especially teachers. But if that parent is on the end of the phone and they are really struggling, or they're not sure what to do, listen to them, reflect back to them what they've told you. And as I said, let them know that you are listening. Because sometimes, as Michele said, just having that time and knowing that they've been heard and taken seriously, and actually that they, that you are wanting to work together in partnership, does so much more and can improve things. What I would say is just one very little tiny thing is, if you know that that parent, before you've contacted them, is likely to be, then maybe, you know, have some get out clause that if they are starting to get annoyed or angry, have some preset sort of statements you can say that can diffuse that situation. Or maybe some way that you can say, oh, I'm being called by a colleague, can I call you back? So you can diffuse that situation, because the last thing you want is for you to just end up in a shouting match with each other.
That's really helpful, Shira. There's a sort of neat little model there in what you were talking about, I think, where learning to reflect back what's being said, acknowledging the parent and acknowledging their experience. So you don't have to judge it, because, you know, it's neither right nor wrong, it's just somebody's experience. And then agreeing with them through conversation, whatever the specific action is, and making sure that we follow up. But also we might come back to this point about diffusion and some of the strategies that you can use if a conversation takes a difficult turn. So I'm just put that in your head, Kully, because I'd be interested to hear if you've had experiences and good suggestions around that. But really, really helpful there, Shira. Thank you. Michele, from your experience, and again, drawing on, you know, your experience as an advocate, working with parents through some difficult conversations, are there particular things that it's important that either the important things that we avoid, or strategies that you've seen really work and be successful that teachers have used in what could potentially have been difficult conversations?
Well, I think as the conversation is progressing, at certain points to keep recapping and saying back to the parent what they said, that could cover if someone has a language difficulty, but also if a parent's stressed, they're not necessarily going to remember everything that's been said in the meeting and who Mr. X or Mrs. Y is and what they're going to do. So really to periodically recap and talk back, so you make the parent may feel listened. You may not agree with what they're saying, but you're saying you can confirm that you've heard their view. And then also maybe recording it, because parents can come out of a meeting and not always remember everything. So even if the very brief bullet points that you may have, they may need to be shared with other class teachers or with the SENCO. So sometimes even some teachers would do a few bullet points, send them to the parent for approval, just to say, this is what we spoke about. So it'd be like a recap, recording it, and then always set a date for review. Because I think that's the main thing. If they walk away and feel like, well, what's changed? We've had this long conversation, and they need to see, well, in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we're going to be able to review the situation and have some sort of targets. But always to be careful about observing behaviours, giving observations and not judgments, because I think that's when people, you know, parents can feel judged and feel a bit insecure and get defensive when they need not be. And I think also attributional styles are quite important. I don't know if I should mention them here, about any given behaviour, whether it's seen as permanent or a temporary thing, whether the locus of control, the child could control it in the future with the right support and help, and also whether it's global or specific. Is it just one subject or all subjects? So not using absolutes like they never do this or they always do X. Just trying to avoid those things, because even if the parent and the teacher aren't conscious of it, subconsciously I think that is absorbed. And if you think of the attributional style of the parent and the teacher and the child, and you mix them together, that's quite powerful. So it's how you frame the behavior, and then your attributional style will show how you interpret it, and then ultimately what targets you can set in partnership with the parent. So I always think at the end you should have some targets that you and the parent have agreed. But if you can, put it in bullet points in an email, because everybody forgets, and especially when people are stressed or anxious, that's many parents say to me, they find that quite difficult to remember everything. And no acronyms, please. That's what I would beg. So
that should be a global point for life, I think, at this point. No acronyms. There's some really rich stuff in there, Michele. I think this point about, you know, we know enough now about psychology to know that when somebody feels judged, that elicits a defensive response almost innately. That's kind of how we're wired as humans. So being careful in our choice of language to prevent any judgments slipping in, because there may be colleagues on this call who are purer than me and who don't have judgments. I aspire to that, but let me say I've got some work yet to do before I get there. But having the judgment is one thing, but managing yourself and any leaking of that judgment, I think, is another. And that's just a good management practice. But also for the children themselves, this distinction you make between, is the issue temporary or permanent? You know, we know with child development, certainly the younger children really struggle with, you know, if something's happening, it is permanent. Everything's permanent all the time in the moment when it happens. You know, just like my 8-year-old doesn't remember life before COVID, you know, claims not claims, it's true, it's his experience. He doesn't remember the inside of his grandparents' house from December 2019. That's a state of being, and finds it very hard to see that it could be other. And of course, that's how kids are built, and that's the development stage that they're in. So being able to distinguish between this is something that is temporary, or this is actually something that is permanent, and we need to come up with different strategies as a result, feels to me like a very, very helpful point. And then the echo to, I guess, Shira made the point earlier about spotting patterns, and that point about, is it a global issue or is it a local issue? Is it just in this class or is it across the piece, and what's going on that's creating some of that? So really useful and rich. And Kully, I'm going to come back to you on this point of de-escalating. Actually, whilst I make a nod to colleagues on the call, I'm going to turn to you for some questions now. So if there's things we haven't talked about that you were hoping we would, this is your golden opportunity to ping a little question into the chat. And we'll keep you anonymous. We don't need to share anybody's names, but by all means, this is a great opportunity to ask the questions if you have them. But in terms of difficult conversations, Kully, and obviously they can be difficult from either side. Either they're not well handled on the side of the education professional, or the parent is struggling to handle them well. Either way, there can be different dynamics going on. But as the education professional, you're going to want to kind of bring that temperature down a bit. Have you seen that done well?
Yeah, absolutely, Sinead. Both Shira and Michele have both talked about this de-escalation almost, but the word keeps coming back to positive framing, and I think that's important, and each individual on their own merit. So key to any conversations we have with parents, as we say with our staff members, whether it's myself making a call or the year lead, we must avoid generalizations, because that's something that stereotypical view that, oh, your child's been messing around today, will give parents have already got enough to decipher at this minute in time. They need to know specifically what is it that their child's done. But rather than starting off by saying a child has done something wrong, how about talking about all those 3 or 4 or 5 other subjects where he or she are absolutely flourishing and doing great things, and then linking it back to, but unfortunately in art or in English, whatever the subject is, or at social times, we've just spotted this problem. Because I think then you've got the parent realizing that we're calling to see there's something just out of the ordinary. Now, Michele talked about, is it global or temporary? And often the phone calls that you're having with parents will be about specific issues. There are very few occasions where a child gets it wrong across the piece. And that's our duty as professionals, to make sure we work out, if he or she is getting it wrong, what is it that we can tap into to help that child thrive, and what is it that he or she are interested in. So there's work for us to be doing as professionals. But when we make those phone calls, it's got to be a voice, a member of staff that they recognise. Or immediately, this should not go to somebody who's considered in leadership, and I've put inverted quotes around there. Could it be a form tutor who is best placed? Could it be indeed the wellbeing champions? I hear at Bristnall Hall we have wellbeing champions in place. There are 30 of them who are trained staff members at level 2. Would it be best, depending on, of course, the circumstances, that they make the phone call home if they're known to our parents, and we share details of them on our website, or certainly with the year leaders, the parents when they come into year meetings prior to COVID, unfortunately. But that's, I think, the key thing there, that they're receiving a phone call from somebody that they recognise. Now, it's okay as well also to say that we've got it wrong as an organisation. Often we as school teachers, as professionals, feel that we cannot be in a position to say something's gone wrong. Now, obviously, we must make sure that we've got the facts. But if it's that a child was given a detention, for example, picked up for the wrong reasons, or was unfairly treated by a behaviour policy, I'm only using loose examples here, say to the parent that we're just going to go away and investigate this, we'll come back, we'll speak with the teacher. What you're not doing there is putting the teacher, you're sort of undermining the teacher's authority, you're not bringing the profession into disrepute, but what that voice is saying to that parent is that I'll look into it. and it's still at the informal stage then. So that parent will happily then accept that phone call the next day or a few days. This is what certainly we found here, is that even your most irate parents, if you say to them, look, give me a couple of days to look at this, I'll give you a call back, and organise that time, as I believe Michelle was saying there, that it's recorded and that there is some sort of review point. Parents very quickly realise that you are on their side, even though you're still representing the high standards of your academy. That's really important. And if you are calling back, organise a time where it stays within a certain amount. So it might be that you're calling back at 4 o'clock, but whilst you can't calendar it in your Outlook because parents may not have access for that, say that I'll call you between 4 and will last until 4:15. So there's a clear window of expectation that parents can't continue. That itself allows for de-escalation, because it means that you're not going to continue a conversation and cover all ground on, in an ongoing manner. If the parent still isn't pleased, what I think you should then do is look to say that, well, I'll refer this in. Maybe it's the head of English that you need to speak to further. Maybe it's a senior leader that needs to make a phone call home later. But certainly give them an opportunity to feel that they've been heard. And I think that was said earlier on too.
Great stuff. There's a lot here that's about making sure people feel heard and acknowledging what's happened and documenting it and making sure that that's shared, isn't there? Been kind of transparent between people.
Absolutely. Sorry, Sinéad, just come back in there as well. Just to say, so we often hide behind things in life generally because we feel that it's easier that way. But what we've done here at Bristnall Hall as well is we've often shared with parents, if they've got concerns about anything that's happened, we share with them from the onset the complaints policy. Now, this is not because we're trying to say just put it formally, but speak to the parent or carer in advance so that they understand that actually there is this sense of transparency. We are being open, and if at any point you're not happy with what we're doing informally, we can go through the formal measures as well, and that then clearly states to the parent that they are being taken seriously at that point.
Brilliant. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, so the first one is around how do we best engage parents and get them involved in the children's learning, and any tips that we have got for that. Any takers on the panel there? Go, Shira, and then Kully.
So obviously, I mean, the first thing you can do is obviously make contact with the parent and form some sort of relationship with them. Make them aware of what the expectations of the school. Each school has different policies, I know that, but it might be that some schools, when I was a teacher, they called it high five. So children, specifically in secondary schools, there was expectation that children came in with a high five, which was their planner, their pen, pencil, ruler and rubber, and that they completed their homework within a set time. Otherwise, there was a consequence. So making parents aware of that, because again, it's about them being engaged right from the onset in what is expected and how to best support their child in their learning. If they are interested and engaged and they know what their child will be doing, like they know that their child is going to get homework twice a week, and that actually, if they are, again, as Michelle was saying, some parents have had a very poor experience of education or may not feel very educated or very good with maths or English, but making them feel that if they are, if they're not sure, they need help, that they can reach out to the school, they can reach out to the teachers so that they can get some support, some help, if the child is struggling. Right. And that, it's not that they're going to get told off because their child hasn't done their homework. I think the other thing that you can do is, again, it's very difficult during COVID time. I know that, obviously, but in secondary schools and in some primary schools, they had open days and parents came in and they could see what people did. They could see all the artwork that kids did on the walls. But there's many ways we can still do that. So if the child has done, when I was a teacher, I taught science, and a lot of the kids, they created beautiful pieces of work, especially with cells. I used to set them a project and make a cell, and they'd go away and they'd make these cells, and we take photos, we put it up on the wall. So there's many ways that you can showcase and celebrate that. And so show the parents that actually, do you know what, your child is doing really, really well, or they've been creative, they've been they've been imaginative, they've done so many different ways. It could be a piece of poetry that they've written. So again, it's kind of sharing that with the parents, so that they can see, actually, do you know what, this is what my child is learning, and this is what they're doing in school.
Thank you, Shira. That's brilliant. Kully, did you have anything you wanted to add to that about how to engage parents in the children's learning?
Absolutely, Sinead. I was smiling about this one because I spoke with Gemma about it earlier. What you mustn't do is use social media as the only form of communication. And I'm smiling about it because on the 28th of August last year, 27th, this was announced, on the 28th of August, it all went live that we need face masks in the classroom. We need to make sure that, you know, they have to be a certain, so Bristnall Hall here, we said they can't have any logos on there, they must be plain. And obviously then you're saying, parents are saying to us, well, in a social media forum, what's the difference between a black or a blue one and one with a logo or not? Surely it's about keeping our children safe. So something that was intended to share information but also maintain our high standards started to come back as a bit of a concern. Now on social media, of course, you know that quickly turns into a sort of snowball effect. So the key here is, I think, is that we must communicate with parents through our formal channels, and that's through parent mail, a system which is what we use. There are many others available, but formalise your letters and communication home to parents and carers, so they expect notification of a formal nature in that way, often via a PDF sent through the systems. Many people use different things. Formalise the way that you let them know about rewards. So if we use a system called class charts, and again, I'm not an advocate for these organisations, but certainly it's something that's helped us revolutionise how parents are told which awards their children are getting or how many points they've received, and also of some negatives too. And I think that's the key thing. And you use social media to celebrate. I think that's important. I think it's where we certainly got it wrong, and this is my decision and I'm not hiding behind it, to say to parents, and there was already an angst in society about face masks, to then say, put something out to all of our followers to say, you're wearing face masks on the first week back, I think was the wrong decision. And whereas if that had gone out through a formal letter and explained this is why and this is the science behind it that we're being informed of for the DfE, it would have been well received. So that's certainly a change moving forward that we'll be keeping.
Just to add to that, is again just be very mindful of the language that you're using, and the people that, you know, the parents, the background of the parents, the sort of their understanding of language. Don't use very long, complicated words if they're just not going to understand it.
Thank you. I was just going to say I was thinking back to when my son was in reception or year one, probably both. And we were invited to do phonics work with our son. And I have to say, I mean, this is, you know, I never learned grammar. It's all beyond me. I'm terribly well educated, but my grammar and my phonics are really poor. And I didn't engage at all. So socioeconomically, I should be a star engaging parent, and I wasn't. But a couple of things made the difference. One, it was explained to me the difference it would make to my son if I did make some time for it. And two, I was given really specific advice and help on how to help my son. So it didn't come down to my confidence or how I chose to approach it. I didn't need to know anything. I was given a really straightforward toolkit. You know, very simple. I say toolkit, it sounds very professional, it wasn't, but some really clear advice and guidance on how to help my son. And then it was, you know, I understood what that would do for him. So I think those are kind of two things that probably are a bit universal in how they apply to engaging parents. But to move on quickly, and we've got a few more questions coming through now. Michele, one for you, if you are happy to take it, is, do you have any tips on engaging parents and carers of students in a SEND setting, where the staff don't have much contact with parents because the children are arriving by transport?
All right. So, well, yes, again, I think it's important to be sharing successes as well as not waiting for a problem to come along. I mean, it may not be possible at secondary school, but in primary settings, I know people have SEN drop-ins on a monthly basis. So that could be something that could be done on Zoom. So you just book, maybe it'd only be a 10-minute slot with the Senko, but you could always then timetable in a longer session as needed. But just knowing that that monthly session is open, and also encouraging SEN groups within the school, like the school where I'm a governor, but they have a parents SEN group. So they'll actually come for a coffee morning, meet as a group with the Senko in school, but that could be, again, be done on Zoom. So just knowing that other SEN parents are put in touch with each other, I think that can feel quite a sense of community and be helpful.
Yeah.
And this is, I guess, is post-diagnosis rather than leading up to it. And then also signposting for parents. I mean, if there should be a capacity on the website to signpost all the local support there is for whether it be autism or ADHD or if it's more of an SEMH, anxiety. So just having that dialogue and having that email available for the parents and managing expectation, because in the SEND world, there's a lot of problems with waiting lists and referrals to CAMS and other things. So it's important the teacher shares maybe even flow charts of, okay, we've recognized this issue, and the next stage is you go to this health centre or to CAMS, the Child Adolescent Mental Health Services, because that's where the sort of pinch points are. And when those parents are in those pinch points, waiting for a referral to a professional, then to signpost them to local support, and then within the school to your SEN groups. I don't know if that's helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you, Michelle. I'm conscious of time, and so I'm going to ask you each for a sentence that you would use in a situation where you had some you were on the receiving end of a very aggressive conversation with an unhappy parent. So this is raised by a leadership team in the chat function. In that situation, what would your go-to language, turn of phrase, sentence be that you would use in that situation to try and bring the tempo down or draw a line? Can I ask each of you for your thoughts on that?
Should I go first?
Please do, Shira.
I think the first thing to do is to recognise that their frustration, maybe their anger, and reflect that back to them. So say something along the lines, I can tell that you're really angry, or this conversation is really causing you a lot of distress or annoyance. And obviously, and say that you're there to support and help them, that you want to find a solution, you want to find some way of actually, identifying what the issue is. Now, it could be that, they're having a bad day, and unfortunately, you've called them up and it's the final straw for them. And you, unfortunately, as a teacher, get the full brunt of how they're currently feeling. Or it might just be that actually they are, very protective of their child. So, try to diffuse that situation when they're being aggressive. Use positive language. Ask them, have they noticed anything different about their child or the young person or the teenager? Do they have any concerns? Is there any things that you can do as a teacher or as a school that can support them and help them? And as we were saying earlier, reflect again. Sometimes just take a moment. Sometimes I know it can be a bit difficult, but just take a moment to reflect on how maybe you're responding to their reactions, because sometimes we don't even realise it. They're getting all angry and annoyed, and you can automatically, without realising, start to get on the defensive. So it's really important. Just take a deep breath. I think the expression is that, count to 3 and breathe out slowly before you respond. In some cases can be very beneficial, but really do acknowledge and use that positive behavior, and just reflect on where they may be. Try and put yourself in their shoes, which can be very difficult at times.
I can imagine saying something like, I can see that this conversation is really frustrating you or really upsetting you, and I'm sorry that's the experience that you're having. And my intention is to work with you to find a really good outcome from this. So it would be lovely if we could come together to do that. I can imagine using language like that. And I suppose a key thing also for colleagues who are dealing with those situations is to get that in early enough, because you don't want to wait till someone's actually got steam coming out of their ears before you choose that language. I think it's saying it early enough. Kully or Michelle, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add into that mix?
Just to agree with Shira, that's really great advice. And as you said, starting at the very beginning of the conversation saying, I'm sorry I had to call you today, or sorry I had to call you at work. I know it's very inconvenienced. And then if they say, yeah, we can go ahead and talk right now, but also to say it's that you've seen some patterns, but also that you can also have an alternative time if they don't want that. And also that, what support do they feel they need? What needs to be put in place? So therefore, you're looking for them to suggest to you what they've heard or what they think could be helpful. So it's going both ways.
Very nice to ask somebody what would be a good outcome for you. What would you want in this? What support would you want? I think that also engages people thinking, which I think dampens down the propensity to just shout. Kully, were you going to add one?
Absolutely. Just to say, it's hi, it's Mr. Uppal here calling from Bristnall Academy. Thank you for getting in touch, because I think that's important that they understand that we value the fact that they've got in touch with us, but also say I'm here to support you, and I'm keen to seek a resolution or resolve this with you by working together. I think they're key things already in that positive framing. That parent then knows that I, not we, it's not a we as Bristnall, it's I'm taking that responsibility to make sure I can seek a resolution with your input. And as was said by Michele and Shira there, it gets them thinking actually, as parents, I'm really angry, I'm really annoyed by what this school's done, but actually what do I want from this? And it could be as simple as, look, I just need this teacher to understand what I'm going through. I just need you as a school to know that we're struggling to get our child to school on time, whatever it is. I think that's important. It gets them thinking how we can put this, not to bed, but how we can actually put this into the right frame of mind moving forwards.
I think there's also something really helpful in what you say there, Kully, in terms of not trying to put it to bed, but trying to helpfully move it forward. You know, I think oftentimes our whole culture is organized around fixing things and having a solution that's neat and tidy with a bow on it. And again, maybe it's just me in this room, but life seems to rarely be like that. But if we can have a little incremental step in the right direction to improve something and begin a journey of making something better, and help people understand that that's what we're engaged in, I think that can be very helpful in terms of managing expectations, but also acknowledging that something positive has happened and shifted in the conversation.
And a follow-up call to that. So once you've actually said that this is the resolution that you sought, maybe a couple of weeks later arranging to call back to check if that resolution has had its intended impact. That's really powerful, and you'll notice then that the relationship between teacher, or certainly academy, and parents becomes a much more positive one.
Brilliant.
Can I just very quickly say, just to add to that, is that obviously this is probably more with secondary school children or pupils than maybe primary school, but if it might be that organising a meeting with the parent and the young person together, so you can identify solutions and things that are going to help each other. Because sometimes it can be like the parent will say, well, I'm trying to get them to school, I'm trying to get them to do all of these things, whereas actually having all the parties together, working together, can actually really help diffuse situations, but also engage parents more. Whereas sometimes they might feel that there's two sides, there's the teacher and there's them and there's the child in the middle. Whereas actually it's not that case. You're all working together for the same thing. And when we're talking about SEND students as well, just be very mindful of what the parents are going through, but also the expectation of those children. We all have, unfortunately, schools have students have targets to meet, but it might just be that child is just not going to be able to achieve those targets that have been set for them. And so have those conversations early with those parents, support those parents to help them. And as Michele said, yeah, seriously, have those links with the S&D and the pastoral leads for their students. And for those students who are being brought in by sort of specific transport, I know in secondary school it tends to be more that they're brought in by, all the kids are brought in by different transportation links. Don't feel scared to pick up the phone early and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Shira. Thank you. I think we're pretty much out of time. So just a couple of quick things. One is there was a question came through from Gemma. Is there a role for the third sector or for community organisations to support schools and parents in improving relationships between parents and teachers? I think the answer is possibly yes. Yeah. There's a lot of nodding heads on the panel here. And actually that's what's led us to have this event. To dip a toe in the water, to start a conversation and to see, is there more work we should and could and might do on this topic to make resources and support available for educators for these kinds of conversations, be they the structures for good approaches to conversations, or how to de-escalate some of the more difficult circumstances that you find yourselves in. And I will welcome feedback from those of you who've been on the webinar to just give us a heads up on what your feeling is around that, whether there's more that could be done here. But some really useful suggestions and tips, and I know the team at Education Support will want to collate those into some handy ready reckoner that you can put your hand on and will be available on the website somewhere. I know Gemma's really happy, I just promised that. But I think that's what we will do. So check in and there will be hopefully some resources available. But thank you very much. Thank you so much to the speakers for giving up your time and coming to have this conversation. I think it is the start of something that is maybe a bigger and broader conversation to be had. but just with your various perspectives and expertise. I so appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And thank you all so much for taking the time out to attend and to share your questions and hopefully to give us a bit of feedback on what we might want to do next. And thank you to the team at Education Support for making it happen. That's very much appreciated.